What does it actually mean to live a truly God-centered life?
The whole thing about this sort of God-centeredness thing is like, am I as close as possible seeing things as he sees it? You know, the last day was just around the corner, that I wouldn't fundamentally change, you know, anything, directionally speaking. The point is not to live in the future, essentially, or in the past, actually, you know. A lot of the Quranic kind of direction and the things that are mentioned seem to imply this, you know, quite clearly.
But then you're at this point where you're now taking a different path. How do you combine the two?
For anybody, really, it's like, it's identify the pain point that in resolving would give you the biggest buzz, right? You have to love it. You have to enjoy it. You have to like it, and be good at it and love doing it.
Batman or Superman?
What is the main message from you want people to hear?
All right, Ali Siddiqui and Fiyal Malik, welcome to In Good Faith. It's a pleasure to have you here as our first couple as guest hosts of the show. And Fiyal, you're making the first female appearance as well, which I've been getting a few comments about, making sure we have the full spectrum of humanity represented on this show. So it's really great to have you here. One of you's a lawyer and one of you's an accountant, or so. You know, clearly I'm sort of asking for trouble. But, but no, it's really, really good to have you here. And maybe it would be good to start off just by you explaining to me and to the world what you're doing here in the first place.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so both of us have been following your content for a while now. I started studying with you in some form as early as 2021. And that was in the context of prayer, and transform my prayer. But since then, I got on board with what you call Club Revelation, the sort of Quran reflection class. Sort of a year after that, Fiyal got on board, you know, roughly around the time that we got engaged, and it sort of became quite a wholesome way to engage with Revelation while actually engaging with each other as well. Yes. And we're both quite familiar with your content. This podcast has been, I think in both our views, a great way to continue to disseminate your broad messages. So I personally felt, and you know, we both felt that we might be good avenues, you know, with which to tease that out further from you during the course of this series. So that's broadly why we're here.
Cool.
Exactly.
Yeah. Should we talk about like what we want to get into in this episode?
We can, but I think Fiyal, maybe you want to give some of your.
I think very similar to what Ali said. I think we have been followers of your content for a long time now, and having the opportunity to discuss some of the topics with you further directly was just something that we were really excited about. And that's basically why we're here.
Cool, great. And quick couple of more things from me then. So you got married when?
The end of 2023.
Yeah, okay, great. So it's been almost, where are we now? 25, okay, fine.
Nearly 18 months.
So 18 months. Yeah. Are you still in the phase of doing like celebrating the monthly anniversary, or is it kind of a...
I think that ended after the first year. I was very good at that. I was very good at that though, I would say. Yeah, 17th of each month. Yeah.
Fine. We won't get into more detail on that. And maybe just one other thing, just maybe before I turn it over to you to sort of start grilling me on various things, which is, what would you say has been for you, maybe each of you, the differentiating sort of component really of this stuff? Like, why? Because there's like 1,000,001 people to follow, to kind of to engage with. What has been different for you? Because you've both been involved in various types of study, learning. You're both conscientious. Like, been thinking about what are all these kind of topics that we talk about probably separately anyway. So what's kept you in it?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first, since I sort of came across you first. I think for me, you're right, there's other sources of knowledge that I've had exposure to. I think the main distinction between that and you is you're quite a unique thinker when it comes to Islam, I would say, or when it comes to devotion to our Lord. A lot of the ideas are quite fundamentally different, dare I say radical, compared to sort of the mainstream thinking that we typically hear. That's not to say you're not part of the mainstream, by the way, sure. But I just mean, if you, however you interpreted that word. But I think for that reason, it's been quite an interesting angle, a different angle, a fresh perspective, if you will, to have alongside the other more conventional sources of Islamic knowledge. And I think they complement each other as well. Sure. Like, so for example, even just me studying Arabic, or both of us studying Arabic as we do, I don't think is at odds with your message when it comes to language. And so it's good to sort of have your voice there alongside all of that stuff in the background. So yeah, that's my take on it anyway.
Yeah, I think pretty similar for me as well. I think the one thing that I really liked about your content specifically was that it just felt refreshing. It just felt like a breath of fresh air in terms of the fact that you were thinking about life and how I think we should see life in more of like a wholesome, more encompassing way.
Holistic, yeah.
Exactly, in more of a holistic way. And I think having a framework to view your life in that way as a Muslim, and that being the fundamental way that you view your life, I think it was a really different way of looking at things for me. So that's what drew me to your content in particular.
Okay, cool. All right. So yes, now I'll hand it over to you and you guys, and you let me know what we're getting into.
Sure. So we sort of wanted to start just by summarizing the broad themes that we want to talk about today. So obviously the idea of a God-centric life is quite central to you and your messaging. We wanted to sort of uncover a bit more about what it actually means to live a God-centered life in principle, but then also how do we, people on an individual level, sort of uncover our specific missions. And then I know you had something to add to that.
Yeah, and I think also specifically, how do we go about thinking about any barriers that are associated with that? I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about the bigger purpose of life, they do hit some mind blocks. And also just delving into perhaps the gender roles and how this might be slightly different for Muslim women in comparison to men.
Sure.
But let's take it from the top. So basically the first sort of thing to sort of drill into is, what does it actually mean to live a truly God-centered life? Or to put it as one of my Arabic teachers might say, كيف أكتشف سر نفسي? How do I uncover the secret of myself?
Ooh, now that's that feels like the stakes feel a lot higher with the second one. But yeah, in terms of the way I see it and the way I think about it is, in a way, it's quite simple, right? And it is what it says on the tin, which is that is my Lord, is God at the center of my decision making? Is He the motivation, for me to do the things that I'm doing? Is He the reason, right? And we talk in broad terms, and the idea is popular about pursuing divine pleasure, right? But that entails, in my understanding, putting Him at the heart of every decision that we take. So I think the difference between what I might say and what conventionally not is necessarily said or taught, but it certainly seems to be understood or practiced or on the ground, is that for a lot of people out there, these are kind of parallel kind of division, like there's sort of divided spaces essentially between what you call the religious or the faith related, and which is often associated with the ritual and everything else. And then on the other side, you have, work and, the rest of life essentially. And I suppose partly just because of my own journey, where what I wanted to, what I emphasize is, or I challenge people to think about how they're utilizing all of their life, essentially their skills, opportunities, passions, talents, all of these different things in service. Because I think, our work, our jobs, careers, whatever, they take up most of our time, attention, energy. They end up becoming the way in which we actually define ourselves. So when you want to introduce yourself to someone, right, or they ask you, so what do you do? Its first question is, so they're assuming, and you're assuming in response to that you need to say that, I'm an accountant, I'm a lawyer, I'm whatever, right? Which is kind of like, we take that for granted, but it's kind of weird as well, if you think about it. So it becomes very central. So it's kind of, for us to think about, the thrust of my sort of intention, energy, direction, motivation, like what is that exactly? And it's just to be able to, in the end, to be able to say, or even in the moment, to be able to look up at any point in time and say, whatever I'm doing right now, I'm doing for you as much as possible. Right. And you mean so that that at every point you've gone really to the heart of the matter, and that you are trying to reflect this relationship, as a central thing in the rest of your life.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think I really liked what you said there in terms of the fact that there's so many parts of us as well that we're trying to essentially bring together. And are there any tools that you think that you found quite helpful in order to do this, in order to find what your purpose is?
So I think it relates to what we were mentioning earlier to do with barriers, because like you said, and I have found this too, when a person is confronted to think about a vision or articulate a vision or think about purpose, objectives, it's very hard for them to escape their current reality and the various, so maybe mental models or social sort of realities and the web of expectations, right, that have built up to inform where they are right now. So it's very hard for people to free themselves from all of that, and also to free themselves from the past. You know, I always say that the decision I made yesterday, or the thing I did yesterday, that doesn't have to inform what I do tomorrow. You know, tomorrow should be informed by, you know, what I want to happen in 10 days' time. You know, rather than, but we carry on doing certain things, and the reason in our minds, well, because I did that, you know, I study these subjects for A-level, so that's why I had to do that kind of degree. I did this job because I did that degree. You know, now I stay in this realm because that's what I know, right? So it goes on and on. So the main thing I would say, just to answer that question, is that what I invite people to do, and what I've done for myself is try to always like consciously identify all of that, and then just remove all of that. So it's not to say that the realities of family life, financial kind of worries or concerns, your own internal things to do with, I don't know, self-doubt and imposter syndrome or whatever, the realities of the time and money and energy that you invested in a particular pathway in life, right? These are all there. Okay, fine. That's great. Thank you very much. Let's put all of that on the side. It's not necessarily going away, but let's just think, it's just blue sky kind of thinking, right? Blank canvas to say, okay, what's my ideal? At least let me know what's my ideal. So if I wasn't worried about finances, and if I didn't have various fears, and let's say another way to put it is, if I was guaranteed success for anything I wanted to go and do, well, what is it that I would really want to go and do? You know? And then I just add a little dose of pressure to say, like, well, you know, now don't assume you've got your whole life ahead of you to go and do whatever it is. Just assume actually that there's some deadline. You know, sometimes I say 10 years, 3 years, 1 year, depending on what mood I'm in and what I think someone can handle. But I think, you know, I'd say, okay, well, if I knew for a fact that in 3 years' time it's all over, plus with all these different factors, no barriers, what's the ideal? It's only when we have something, now you can see clearly, this is my ideal, this is what I'd really love to do. Okay, yes, then you bring back all these other kind of factors and stuff, but you at least have a sense of the ideal, and then you can start moving towards it. Most people, I find that in this kind of conversation, once they've gone down a particular line, which they wouldn't necessarily say is drawing from this sort of God-centeredness fully, when you say, okay, well, look, if you took all this away, then what? Most people, they stutter because they actually have just sort of forgotten or not really thought about it. So they don't even know what the alternative is. You know, what would be the path of maximum contentment, maximum fulfillment, maximum devotion. So I think that's the first thing.
Okay, yeah, interesting. I guess what you're getting at essentially is this idea of for those viewers who don't know, obviously there's this concept in Japanese culture of ikigai, right? The overlap between what you like, what you're good at, and what pays well. And I've heard you talk in
and
the
what
past.
The world needs as well.
And what the world needs, yes. And then I've heard you sort of overlay this extra layer on top of that, which is the Muslim ikigai. So the extra layer is, what does God want from you? So that sort of makes sense. And you're right, I think we find ourselves sort of chained to these material factors that are seen by us as being needs, and that sort of drives us. And then we end up doing something because the last chapter was this. But going a little bit deeper into that, so essentially what you're hinting at there is this duality between our work lives and our personal lives, without making a reference to the TV series Severance there. But there's this, this idea that we are sort of two different people, outside of work and within work. And what you're hinting at is wanting to integrate the two, right? And stitch them together. So how do we, you've sort of, touched on it, but how do we avoid compartmentalizing the faith aspect of our lives? Because, okay, it's all well and good saying, well, we should assume we've got 3 years left to live and all the resources are taken care of, what should we do? But in the interim, we find ourselves where we happen to be, right? And so whilst we're there, how do we ensure that we are the same person, faith-wise and otherwise, inside of work and outside? It's not like a switch in our brain we can just turn on and off, as we go up the lift. So, yeah, do you have any further thoughts on how to avoid doing that compartmentalization whilst in the day-to-day of our work lives?
Well, this is the thing. So it depends what we're like. If we're assuming that the status quo is what it is, right, and then that's just going on. Now, how do I make the best of this situation, right? If that's the question, then I would say in a way it's almost too early. In a way to almost we can address the question, but I would say if that's the question that someone is thinking about, then it would sound to me as though there's almost partially given up on the kind of the broader kind of thing in the first place. Because I'm not the kind of person who if somebody says to me, "Oh yeah, that's all very well, but yeah,"
Right. Okay.
I'm like, no, hang on, stay over here, for a second. First, tell me what that ideal is, because you see, I'll tell you, and it answers the question in a way. If you know what the ideal is, then what that does is that automatically puts into perspective whatever your current kind of reality is. Okay, so if whilst you're doing, your I'm just going to say, like, not addressing you specifically, but just anybody, right? Someone's doing their corporate law job, right? And that's not something that they're doing it. That's not something that's not their life purpose, their life passion. They kind of realize that in a way. And they realize that the factors that contributed to it were, that there was all these external and environmental kind of factors that kind of brought them into that thing. And they, to a certain degree, they sort of they were sold certain stories, let's say, and to a certain degree they fell for them, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that there's something evil or bad or corrupt about it, but I'm just saying that, again, it's not their ideal. Now, so up to a certain point in time, this was a major achievement. This was where the kind of the almost, it was like a privileged thing. You felt a certain degree of pride, blah blah blah, all of this stuff. But then, actually, once you realize, or once you think to yourself, well, am I engaged in this for my Lord? Like, is this my labor of love for my Lord? And you think, well, actually, that's not the case, right? Now I leave that aside. Then I think about, okay, what would be? And then I have a good idea about what that is. All of a sudden, you can see why that becomes, like, top of mind. And then this thing becomes, okay, yeah, it's like, it's a thing I need to do it. I've got to where I've got to. But I see it just in a whole different way. Like, all of the sort of all of the packaging and the dressing and everything, falls away, and you just see it for its reality, right? Meaning, just it's a means to earn. You're applying your skill within that, but it's not. You may or may not be with kind of people who are sort of aligned with you at a deeper level, right? But you see it for what it is all of a sudden, and then you get and then this is the thing that excites you. Now, if your ideal excites you, then if it's true in the sense that it is truly the thing that you would actually occupy yourself with, were you to have all the freedoms and the times to do so, then I would say you would inevitably then start to make steps in that direction.
Right.
Yeah. How do you sort of do it? It's again about framing. Like, the whole thing about this sort of God-centeredness thing is, like, am I as close as possible seeing things as He sees it? Am I prioritizing things in the order of priorities that aligns with divine priority? Right? And then you realize, well, actually, then you start to put everything in its place. So obviously there's many verses in the Revelation around the deception of the life of this world, right? And one of the descriptions that is given, right, is that it is let me get the order correct. So يَعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا لَعِبٌ وَلَهْوٌ وَزِينَةٌ. So this is in Surah chapter 57, Surah Al-Hadid, which means iron. So it says, like, no. And this is really interesting, right? Because ilm is like knowledge. It's like know, as in, like, know it, not just know it in here, like, internalize the fact that, right, the life of this world is like a play or an amusement, an adornment. وَتَفَاخُرٌ بَيْنَكُمْ, a cause of mutual kind of boasting amongst you, right? There's that kind of pride element. Sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's kind of covert, right? وَتَكَاثٌ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ, and this mutual competition to increase in resources and sort of children, offspring, etc. And then it gives like the kind of the analogy that to paraphrase of, like barren land, rain comes, crops grow, everyone's happy and delighted, but then soon, everything withers and dies. So it's just this perspective kind of putting on everything, and that's it. You just got to see things the way they are. And we're not, the duality that we're talking about in this case is not this kind of like this kind of two-facedness where someone shows like a pious front in one place and then in impiety. That's not what we're here discussing. That's a separate problem. But what we're just here discussing is a sense of alignment where the things that I'm doing are what are they sort of driven by, And so if there's somebody in that situation, you got to occupy yourself. You got to try and occupy more of your other time with the kind of things that you feel are more aligned with with your purpose, essentially, and that will start to, I suppose, help you, sort of shift the balance.
Cool. So you're saying it doesn't need to be a like all or nothing principle. It can be a gradual principle to alignment, essentially, and there should be some level of fluidity there. And as long as you're continuously questioning yourself, you're challenging yourself, etc., then eventually, hopefully, inshallah, like those two things will reach alignment.
Absolutely. I mean, all change is iterative. You know, even if I always find it useful to reflect on the fact that, like, you know, God Himself says that He could essentially, you know, again, to put it in very kind of contemporary speak, right, or paraphrase it, like essentially snap His fingers and this would come about and that would come about, right? He just needs to say be and it is. But we don't think to ourselves, well, why did he decide to evolve this situation of like the universe or the planet, you know, over like billions of years, you know,
or indeed revelation.
Right. Well, exactly. Yeah, that's a good one, right? So, and it's even referred to specifically as to, you know, they say, right, that why hasn't it been sent, you know, in one go, right? And then the response is, meaning the revelation, why is it coming in this kind of bit part thing? Probably, you know, some people are probably getting frustrated by this kind of attrition by truth bombs, you know, coming over and over again. But it's like, yeah, why not all in one go? And then one of the reasons given is because in this way we strengthen your heart, we strengthen your resolve. Yeah, so it's this gradualism. So just as though the process of courage building, fear conquering, right, resolve kind of development, let's say, these are all gradual things. So is sort of self-discovery, if you want to put it that way. It's gradual. Like I would say, even in my case, you know, from the outside, it might always, you know, might seem that I'm kind of just settled and in my place, whatever. But as I think I've mentioned in previous discussions, like for me, it's constant, this process, always kind of like just checking in again, seeing, because it just gets finer and finer, more refined, you know, because what the world needs, or what my world needs, meaning the problems that I can solve, your definition of that becomes more refined over time in such a way that aligns with, oh yeah, what do I really love? Yeah, there's all these things that I think that I like, and I'll try, but no, actually the thing that I really love is whatever it is, or the thing that I'm really good at is this, you know, but that only comes with experimentation. But the point being is, like, take action, essentially, and believe that you can live a life where you wouldn't change anything. Right? That's, I think, the thing. Because as with all of these things, like, if you don't believe you can ever get there, right? Like, that's just a pipe dream. Oh yeah, that's nice, that's good for other people. Well, then you're already writing yourself off, you're writing the situation off. You're not thinking that I can actually live a fully devoted, coherent, integrated, you know, life where actually, yeah, like, then if I did know that, you know, the last day was just around the corner, that I wouldn't fundamentally change, you know, anything, directionally speaking. And that's what we're talking about here in terms of that duality. It's a directional duality, or even more than a duality, right? Lots of competing things going all sorts of different directions, serving different, you know, sort of mini gods, let's say, as opposed to everything just going in one direction.
Makes sense. I mean, we're about to get onto the topic of the Muslim professional in more detail, which I know you'll talk about. But I guess to sort of wrap that bit up, it sounds like, would you identify in the broader lay Muslim community, therefore, a bit of a lack of self-confidence, or a too much fear in terms of making this step? Is there something psychological or mental holding us back when it comes to that, would you say?
So I think what's missing at a broader level is this issue of cause, or identifiable or definable cause. Yeah, there's nothing yet that, if you were to take a cross section of, you know, believers from across the community, just to say across Britain, and, you know, everybody from, you know, the butcher, the baker, the banker, you know, whatever, and you know, the scholar, the teacher, you know, whoever, just across the whole spectrum, and you just take a cross section, and you were to ask them, like, what is it from a mission standpoint or a core standpoint? Like, what do you understand that you're part of trying to achieve as a collective here, as, you know, believers, you know, of Britain, basically? What are you trying to achieve here? I don't think you might get some answers, but you wouldn't get coherence across the group. Yeah. So my point is that I don't think we have a clearly defined, unifying purpose or agenda. Now, in broad terms, I say what I think that should be, in real simple terms, right? And a lot of these things are just like hidden in plain sight things to me, which is to say that the unifying cause of believers is for belief and faith to flourish in the society in which they're in. So they need to do or bring about the combination of, you know, actions, words, resources, and what have you, to bring about a situation where the order in society is reflective of, like, divine will, just as on an individual level we try to order ourselves individually in reflection of divine will. So there's a social mission or agenda, which obviously is a very prophetic idea, right? That's what prophets were there to do, essentially, and that's then for us to reflect. So the issue is, so everything we're talking about is that when individuals find their purpose, not just the individual purposes that you go and find for yourself and that's all very well for you. The whole point about this actually is that it's very much that you optimize for yourself, but in such a way that synergizes with everybody else, because you've all got this overarching binding thing that you're behind, right? So and that's where unity comes from. That's how you actually solve. That's the only way you solve the unity problem, right? Is when there is a shared cause and everyone believes they're part and parcel of that overarching thing. Now, it's not just a kind of personal, mental, fear-based whatever. It's that there's nothing for people to aspire to, right? So when somebody goes or somebody or a group of people, or more increasingly, which is partly what I'm trying to facilitate through this, right, puts the sort of the flag in the ground or the mast in the ground and says, no, here, people, is where we should be trying to go. Then everybody can start to see and imagine what it might look like, and then there's more of a self-motivation to find their place within it. Right? How do I fit within this picture? I want to be part of that thing. That sounds exciting. Right. That sounds interesting. So imagine then, cities, countries, etc., where the faith is flourishing, where the combination of, moral, ethical, and sort of material kind of outcomes are just superior across the board, where all of the things that people complain about in their day-to-day lives and whatever that are holding them back from fulfilled lives and lives of devotion and faith, those barriers are being removed. Right? So that's all possible, but we don't lose sleep imagining or thinking about that, is the point. And so if we start to do that, then people will start to, rally round, I suppose.
Right. Gotcha. We need that structure. So I think that sort of covers a couple of the next bits that we wanted, but you wanted to talk to some extent about the demographic aspect of that.
Yeah, I wanted to talk more about, do you feel there's a difference when we're looking at our purpose as we age, essentially? Does that change through time?
Gets more urgent,
yeah. Yeah, I think so. But then at the same time, as you grow older, you do start to feel a lot more stable. You feel more set in your ways as well. And what are your thoughts on, I guess, how that evolves as you grow older?
Yeah, it can evolve in different ways, but it reminds me of, and I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but it reminds me of a certain attitude, which is that, once I get all of these things in order, then I'll think about it, kind of thing, right? And I know people who are still thinking about it, 20 years on, right? So the point being is that I personally don't buy that one, right? Like, there's that kind of achieve your financial freedom, and once I've got all my financial freedom, and then I'll go and do something, good sort of thing. It's a very I find it's a very secular kind of way of looking at it, in my view. It's kind of, let me sort myself out, and then I'll figure out everyone else. So I would just like to think about it as, at any point in time, the point is not to live in the future, essentially, or in the past, actually. A lot of the Quranic kind of direction and the things that are mentioned seem to imply this, quite clearly. Especially these phrases to do with, for example, la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. Like, this is a common thing, describing believers, that there's no fear. It's interesting. It's really interesting, that one, because when it talks about fear, it says there's no fear over them. It doesn't say alayhim. Yeah, exactly. But whereas grief is something that they are, so that you're saying there's no fear over them, nor do they grieve. Right? So fear doesn't cloud them, essentially. It doesn't even say they don't fear as a verb, but fear is this kind of, becomes this, dark cloud or, cage or what have you, that is, surrounds a person in that way, and nor do they grieve. But the point is, fear is with regards to the future, typically, and grief is with regards to, obviously, whatever has happened. So I'm just saying, just be in the moment, right? And in the moment, what you want to do is, you just want to be maximizing your value. How am I adding the most value, and the kind of value that I think, my Lord sort of approves of, let's say. Now, I don't think it's ever too soon to do this visioning thing, because the vision stuff, the purpose stuff, it's always a hypothesis, right? It's always something that can iterate, can change over time, like we said earlier. And so if somebody starts even as a teenager, right, and they here's what I'm trying to do, and they start in that direction. They now look at their education at school, education at university, the different things that they could get involved with, the different kind of careers and stuff in that context. So, for example, see, it's very different. This is why you can never judge these things from the outside, right? So if somebody in that early stage in life, to keep it on the stages thing, somebody who's going into that career, which they know doesn't fulfill, is not like their life purpose thing, but is a place of excellence where they will pick up XYZ skills. Now, there are degrees, right, within which that, in my mind, forms like a good sort of justification or way of thinking. or doesn't, because in some cases it's just this really broad thing. I don't know what I want to do afterwards. I haven't really have thought about it at all, but in the meantime, let me just go get some skills, right? And 20 years later, they're still getting skills, right? So there's that kind of thing. Or there is a very deliberate, very, very deliberate, like this is the area that I'm interested in. This is the vision. This is the goal. Have quite very clear about that overall kind of vision, mission, the collective thing that we just spoke of, where they want to fit into that. Okay, I see this as a genuine stepping stone, right? Typically in a time-bounded way, yeah? To then say, okay, that's a stepping stone, and that leads to that. Now, what's powerful about that, it's not about your security, as your priority, right? It's about your kind of optimizing your kind of skill set and your potential for the thing that you really want to do. And in the meantime, you're still working on that other thing, still top of mind. That's central. Hasn't escaped you, right? So what I'm trying to say is that, like, to your point about stages, like there's no, the time is always like yesterday, to do this stuff, I think, and to keep moving in that direction. And the problem is that if that doesn't happen over time, I think there is this kind of like encrusting kind of process that then takes place, set in your ways, where change becomes very difficult. And yes, there might be, and there are. I know some people who they're in that kind of situation where they have their kind of midlife crisis. They're going to wake up, in their 40s or whatever, and they are financially well enough to then make some of these well off enough, I should say, right, to make some of these adjustments to then say, okay, now I'm devoting disproportionately the rest of my time to whatever good. But, one phrase I really hate is giving back. I hate this phrase, right? Like, I don't like it at all. Now I've received, I've taken, oh, now let me give back. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very, it's almost like, it's partly patronizing, right? And it's kind of partly sort of, but I'll only give back when, get to a certain point. Whereas actually, no, we just give. We don't give back. We just
it's
give.
Not ours to begin with.
Well, exactly. So it's a very different perspective, right? There's this kind of entitlement kind of thing going on there. Whereas, our thing is just to give of what we have. Yes, you can only give from what you have, but a lot of what you have in your ability to give comes from starting to give in the first place. The experiencing. So I would say something like that. Like I would say it's never too late, but it's also never too soon. And that's how I look at it. Right? I think the time's always now. Like our operating just through linear time is that's another delusion of this whole thing, I think.
Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, and today is a gift. That's why it's called the present, as I learned from Kung Fu Panda. Before we go into the next bit, I do want to, not challenge, but I want to push a little bit.
Please do challenge, Otherwise, that's something that the audience members sometimes say. There's not enough challenge.
Okay, cool. Well, let me challenge you a little bit on the age factor. Because you might have seen, so my dad recently was a guest on the Kestrel Muslim Money Talk podcast with my brother, talking about his sort of life story, and in particular his immigrant story. And I suppose irrespective of age, there was a generation of Muslims with a capital M who came to this country seeking, first and foremost, economic prosperity or social upward mobility, not because that's the end goal of life, but because they saw it as the only way, the necessary tool to achieve, or to give us, our generation, the luxury to even have these conversations and to even make that next step. That generation, they've not come and gone, they're still here, clearly, but a significant proportion of their life, particularly their working life, has been consumed by that, by getting their children to that level. What do you say to that generation?
Good question. So I say, this is what I say. I say, it all comes down to intention, as we know. Everything comes down to what the intention was. So you can have the person who's working hard, doing that kind of tough job or whatever, dealing with all the whatever racism and blah, 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 and whatever else they need to kind of be, had to deal with. And I'm building a better future for my kids, right? But the point being is, if the aspiration was purely economic, or mostly economic, well, then the aspiration was economic and mostly economic, right? So that my kids can get into good jobs, and then the pride is in, oh, my son became a doctor, my daughter became a lawyer, whatever, right? So that's very different from, I'm working hard, setting the foundations for my kids so that they can do something with regards to this faith, this proposition, right, in this place. And part and parcel what's required for that is a degree of social and economic capital, right? Which then, for them to be, for them to be well educated, for them to have, to be able to, move within sort of society and to function in a way that is effective, right? Then that's different.
Right.
Amongst all of those who of that generation, there were those who were more or less involved in the building of mosques, for example, right? Like, yeah, the mosques were built by that generation, but not all of that generation, some of that generation, right? And then of those, obviously, some were done in great ways and some were done in not so great ways, right? Because they became the little fiefdoms, right? And they became, sort of cultural kind of hubs for particular ethnicities or whatever, right? And some were operating in a different way. So what I'm trying to say is, again, is that some things happen deliberately and some things happen by accident. Okay. And I'm just saying, for any person, it's like, well, you're accountable relative to what you actually intend, right? The fact that there might have been some accidental kind of consequences from your positive consequences from your not so great motivations. Yeah, I don't know how much of that you're going to kind of claim. You know what I mean? So it depends again, that intentionality. So and I was thinking about this because people say sometimes, yes, in this kind of conversation, because if you take what you've mentioned and take it to its fullest degree, they'll say, yeah, but what about in other parts of the world? This is like a middle class conversation, basically. What about the kind of the farmers and the peasants in such and such a land where they're just literally fending and looking after the next meal or whatever? But even in that scenario, which by the way is not a far description from what it was like for the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in many parts of that time when they were, really struggling, and there was persecution and there was a lack of resources and hunger and all of these things. It's like, you can still be part of a mission or not. You see, you can still be part and parcel of that. So as with any of these, some of these kind of more contemporary kind of movies that describe or kind of tell the stories of these kind of mission type things, like, examples like Braveheart come to mind, right? So in that kind of context, right, a leader lays down a particular cause, right, lays down an ideal, a cause, something to, and usually it's foisted on them from, some external thing, right? And then you can rally all sorts. You can rally the nobles, right? And you can try and unite, the tribal chiefs or whatever, but and you can rally like the totally unskilled, ignorant sort of masses too, who you can give them something to kind of to believe in, essentially. So I'm just saying that actually, the smallest, it's all about that. It's all about that intention. And so the seed planted when it looks like there's nothing even going on, right? Or there's no I always think about. The Kaaba, the sacred house, is a great example of that. I mean, when Abraham and Ishmael are building the foundations for that particular place, I mean, what's going on around them? It's just totally like a desolate, barren situation, right? Two people struggling, like by any external analysis, contemporary analysis, it's like, what, this total madness going on here? What is happening? But now look, so a lot of it is what are you setting the foundations for? We're setting foundations. Our children will always be, because there's always going to be a future. There's always the next thing. It's like, okay, are we just moving in the right direction? So the job is never done. It's just, are we moving in the direction?
Okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah, I liked what you said before as well, in terms of it is all about intention, and it's very much about if you're seeking a certain type of education, or you're seeking a certain type of workplace for the intention of, this is a place of excellence, for example, like you said, and it will get me the tools to do what I want to achieve next, but with the bigger version of my purpose and my mission, etc. I think that's a nice way to look at it, because it also removes, I guess, the fear behind it, that this needs to happen like tomorrow. Like, there is, as long as there's intention behind it, this can be a gradual process, like you said before. Yes.
See, it's very easy to delude ourselves that, right, also that it's intentional, right? And the way that you would know is that you would know through specificity. So you would know that, like, the skills I'm gathering, or the experience that I'm gathering, like, what is the next step, or what is the actual effect that's having, right? So it's like a very broad or loose intention that I'm staying in this thing to develop these skills and to have these certain types of experiences, so that at some point in the future I will be able to do X, Y, Z, but it's really undefined, and I don't know when, and I don't know how, and I don't know why, that kind of thing is quite common, I would say, and that's, and then I don't think one can rely on my intention. I'm talking of something which is quite, again, intention and vision go together, I think. The intention is, what do I see at the end of the road? Can I define it? Where are we? Where am I going? Where do I want to take things? And what has this really got to do with that? It's a little bit like, from a different, and to your earlier point about stages, things can change in that, because, for example, you might start down a particular pathway, thinking that this is going to equip me with the skills and the thing that I need to go and achieve a particular purpose down the line. But actually, they realize within a year that's not so much the case. It's different to what they thought,
Mm-hmm.
right? For whatever reason. Could be because of certain team members, could be because of the type of work that they ended up doing, could be because they got shunted around here and there. Right? It wasn't quite what they thought, and it wasn't quite as or because their thinking around their actual real objective, is has developed to the degree that this now no longer seems relevant anymore. So now that's a great way to test your intention, because now what are you going to do? Yeah, are you going to shift, or are you going to stay in what's comfortable, right, or temporarily kind of comfortable, etc. But someone who's willing to shift now and be dynamic about that and clear about that, then that's then obviously it's a different thing. So I just think that there is a sometimes we can have these really loose kind of intentions. I'm in a particular type of firm, in a particular type of industry, and the best that I can come up with, it's really important that there are Muslims in this industry or something, Well, okay, but it's not for you to make these macro judgments around whether that's important or not. Is that really like the central driving, motivating force for you to be there? Maybe, maybe not, right? But I wouldn't say that might be true, but it's not again the central reason for you to stick around in such a certain place, right? Maybe in certain contexts, maybe for certain people, depending what they're up to,
Could
right?
be,
And what they could. But I'm just saying, it's important to be quite self-critical and to expose ourselves to external, like people who kind of like friends, mentors, whoever, who will just help us hold a mirror up to ourselves, basically, to really just test, like, are you for real or not?
Okay, great. That's actually quite a good segue, because speaking of Muslims in the workplace, there was something on that we wanted to explore a bit more deeply.
Yeah, I think when it comes to thinking about the workplace in particular, I feel like, just speaking from someone from my generation, I think we tend to go about it in a very like need-centric approach. Meaning, what is it that I as a Muslim need from work, and just stick there as like the bare minimum. For example, all I need to flourish in this workplace is like a prayer room. I need to lay down my boundaries for Ramadan, for example, or convey what it is that I want to get out of Ramadan. So what would you say to someone trying to move beyond that?
Yeah, well, this is obviously a widespread problem. It's not even just a problem in the workplace. It's just a problem everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, it's very much it's like symptomatic of a almost like a causeless minority, okay, essentially. So it's sort of there are certain things that define me as a minority, and there's certain things that I need to do regardless of anyone or anything else, and I just need to be tolerated. Right, or to a minimum degree facilitated. Yeah, but if you just stand back and just even as I say that, I feel like uncomfortable, right? Because it's so uninspiring to me. Yeah. So it's not that that's not true. You want to be in spaces where those things can be facilitated and what have you. But it's just, again, it's a mindset thing, right? So it's not need-centric. It shouldn't be need-centric as much as it's contribution kind of centric. It's also to do with like the consistency of the attitude. So there are certain things that you need and you want, but then to what extent are you willing to advocate for similar things for others, right? Where there's sort of needs, quote unquote, exist. To what extent are you also thinking about the way in which this is all understood by others? So you're not just, again, seen as a sort of a distant, kind of confusing minority, right? And there has been a lot of good work on that. There's, no doubt. I mean, I've seen it. Like a lot of things that are, one of the common things nowadays is that a lot of these networks, at various firms in and around Ramadan, for example, it's not just about our needs in relation to kind of fasting and what have you, coming from quite a, just and where the emphasis is all on that, but it's also about sharing the spirit of this, helping others to understand it. Even others are participating in fasting.
Fast for a day, yeah.
Right, yeah. But it's linked, and the narrative goes beyond the reason that we fast is to feel sorry for people or whatever who don't have food, which is obviously not the core reason, maybe not even a reason at all. So it brings the faith component thoroughly in there as opposed to just some cultural oddity essentially. So I think things like that are those developments I think are positive, and I think people are realizing this more over time, that we just don't want to be diversity statistics, basically.
Yeah.
And so that's why the whole, DEI kind of discussion agenda, etc. Obviously, it has its place, I think, to afford people like minimum sort of, let's call it rights, respect, etc. But the conversation cannot end there, especially from our perspective, because we have the difference between us and say many other certain types of other kind of minority groups out there is that we feel that we have something that is valuable for people, full stop. It's an existential thing that we're discussing. It's not just a cultural kind of thing that is particular to us, and it's never going to be relevant for anybody else, right? Which is how we collectively, is how we think about it oftentimes. So that's the difference. And so that's where you want to, that's
Right.
where and that's a prophetic thing. It's almost like, having that concern for others before you have it for yourself, which we sometimes don't demonstrate very well.
Yeah, well, it's actually really interesting that you say that, because I was going to touch on this point of taking the average well-to-do Muslim corporate employee who he's figuring out his mission or her mission, but for the time being, he's still in that corporate job. God-centeredness for him, does that look like giving back to his colleagues by virtue of sort of organically sharing the message in some way, not in a sort of proselytizing way, if you will, but more like, I don't know, like, or sometimes organically conversations arise, or you might do something, you might take an action or refrain from a certain action because of your faith.
Yeah.
And then at that point, either they ask you or you bring it up. Is that sort of what you're getting at in terms of not giving back, but sharing, sharing the
Yeah, I mean,
message,
just the point is, I think, just be confident and authentic. That's it. So sometimes that just is, you're not, in a way, I think it works best when you don't feel that you're trying to make a point.
You're just being yourself.
You're just being.
Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
That's it. So that's a big part of it, right? Like it's a big part of it. Now, yes, at a certain point, you might think about it more, quote unquote, strategically. But I think that's not even about it. It's more just the appropriateness of things.
Yeah.
But just being confident and authentic, and being at least open or able to discuss. You're not trying to force. You're not trying to force things. But naturally, it would open the avenues for discussion, right? So, for example, there's a difference between the person who's in the workplace who take the issue of prayer, right? There's a certain type of person who will pray at home or in the mosque because they're comfortable there, but in the workplace they would never do so.
Yeah.
Okay, and they'll accumulate them at the end of the day and do it there. And the only reason for that is basically a shyness or an embarrassment. So now someone needs to think, okay, well, what's going on here, right? Why am I feeling this? That's a good trigger for an internal kind of sort of introspection, let's say. Then there's a kind of person who will do it, but they'll steal away to kind of do it, and nobody knows what's going on. Fatima or Bilal are just kind of disappearing every so often, right? We don't know where they're going. Yeah.
Into a cupboard.
Maybe their diet's not so great or whatever. Yeah. So there's that kind of person, and then there's just a person who just from the get-go is just kind of open. Right. And then it's not, the conversation isn't, oh, by the way, I do this, and I need my time to go and do this, almost as if to kind of, again, like tolerate me sort of thing.
Yeah.
But more just as a point of information, because you're communicating to colleagues or maybe someone that you're going to report to, so that they're aware of the fact that that's going to be happening essentially, and that, if it is relevant to mention, it may or may not be depending on the context. But I'm saying that's it really. And so when it happens, it happens. So it's like, so you come back to the desk from somewhere, colleague says, where were you, what you're up to, whatever. I just grabbed some lunch and then I just, did my prayers and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. And then that may or may not mean anything, right? Or bring about anything, but at least you're not trying to make a point. You're just being you.
You're being authentic.
You're not avoiding the kind of mention at all. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. I think it's just being confident about our worldview as not this kind of this thing that we maintain on the side, but we actually, it's a healthy challenge for people to think about the fact that, I should be more worried about the fact that maybe somebody else hasn't maybe considered some of these bigger life questions or their own relationship with God. I should be more worried about that possibility than I'm worried about the fact of how I might be considered because I am trying to take that seriously.
No, I think that's reassuring to hear, because I think both of us individually sort of do take more of that approach to Muslimness, if you will, at work. So I actually got an idea from you, which is when you circulated or you created these Outlook diary reminders for each of the 5 prayers, right? A couple of years ago. And so since then, I've actually started putting in my diary at work, Dhuhr prayers, Asr prayers. And in my old firm, it was public. People could see that. But I deliberately did that because, as you say, I'm not shoving it in anyone's face, but it's more to say like, oh, Ali's doing this right now because that's something that he does. And it's just sort of a part of his life sort of thing. And I think, that's kind of been the same for you. I guess the last point on this then is that, to clarify, it's not, when it comes to purpose, you're not saying that each and every Muslim needs, like uppercase M Muslim, needs to go and create their own venture necessarily. Their purpose can be within the environment which they currently occupy. It's just as long as they are certain about what that is and how that takes them to their ultimate, meeting with their Lord.
Identifying purpose or identifying your core mission, project, the thing that you really care about, that you want to devote yourself to, that's not really, to my mind, it's not now sort of, you don't start with a constraint of your current environment and
Right.
then answer that question.
It's a blank canvas.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Exactly. So you do that first. Then you say, like, why am I in this environment? Is it relevant? So if you go through the process, then you end up back at, for whatever reason, like, here is the best place for me to be right now.
Mm-hmm.
Then fine, right? Then you function from there. If you end back, if you go through that process and you realize this is an okay place for me to be right now, it's not the best place for me to be right now, then of course, whilst we are wherever we are, right, we're just supposed to be as authentic, confident, decent, as we can be. So that's not necessarily, to my mind, that's not about purpose fulfillment. That's just about just being a good person, right?
Right.
Like, so,
Okay.
or just being decent.
Yeah.
The purpose fulfillment question is a kind of almost like a different question, because what I don't think it works is almost this backwards justification, of to say, well, here I am, that's where I am, now let me just make the most of it, That's okay, good, that's good in a way too, obviously, better to make the most of it than not to make the most of it, but that's not necessarily answering the fundamental question, right? You're still playing a different sport to the one that you should be playing.
Sure. Gotcha.
Just a challenge on that, slightly. What would you say on the topic of capacity and people being judged to just what they're capable of? What if someone just can't go beyond what their current environment is at the moment, and they believe that that's just it, like that's all that they can offer at the moment?
Yeah, no, that's fine. But the capacity is part of it, right? So when you think about your ability to solve problems, your skill set, your passion, whatever, right? Then that we all have limits, wherever those limits are, on all sorts of different things. Okay, so again, but this is the thing: limitation is not. It's typically not then. Typically, but not always. But typically, it's not to do with here's where I am right now. Like we assume a lot, basically. Sometimes or make these assumptions or these kind of false kind of assumptions about, okay, well, here's this what I'm doing right now. This particular job that I'm doing, like that's the most that I can do. I mean, how do you even know that? Like what it's what that says to me usually is, afraid to try, afraid to change, kind of insecurity, whatever. That's what that says to me. So again, if you've gone through a process, you're trying things, you're doing things, whatever, and then, okay, this is the most I can do. Fine, but it's different from saying, look, it's different from directional clarity. That's like saying, okay, I'm in a car, I know that's where I'm going to this destination, but I can't go more than 20 miles an hour. That's my side complaint on the 20 mile an hour limit, right? But it's like that. So that's my capacity. I can't handle speed more than that, right? Okay, I can only drive for a certain amount of time at a time before I need to take a break. Okay, but at least I know where I'm going.
Yep. Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
That's very different from like I'm just sort of going. I'm just driving wherever. I'm round and round in circles. Like I don't know where I'm going, but this is the best that I can do. Which that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's clear. So then there's a big topic, a sort of sub-topic within that, which I'll leave to Fiyal to take that.
But listen, wait, before we get there, maybe if we have the time. So like, it'll be good just to maybe summarize, like, it would be good maybe for you guys to share individually, and maybe you can start with Fiyal and Ali, right? Like in terms of, as you've both been in your respective careers for like 6 years now, something like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how has the thinking evolved? Like how has your thinking evolved with respect to just when you think about your work and you think about yourself and your purpose? Like what's that been like?
I think for me it started off very much as I guess just wanting to reach a point where I was reaching some type of stability, essentially. And I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to as well.
Defined by what?
Stability defined by, I guess, economic sense, but then also just in terms of having a good foundation, like a professional qualification, a career that that's stable, etc. And I think a lot of that stemmed from like my background, my parents, for example, the messaging that I received growing up. Very standard, I think. And this whole concept of mission, purpose, everything wider than that didn't really start going through my mind until, I guess, I got more stable in my education, in my career, etc.
Well, what prompted it?
What prompted it was thinking there must be more to this. There must be more to this. And also the sense that I think from my education, from my experience that I've had so far, I do feel like I'm in a privileged position to do more. And not feeling like I'm utilizing everything that I've got in front of me to my greatest potential, essentially. And I think that has increased a lot, and we've had a lot of discussions about this over the past year, both of us, together collectively and individually as well, on just thinking about the point that you said earlier, how can I now utilize all the skills that I have and do this currently, not thinking, oh, I'm going to continue doing this and give back in the future, to use your term, but how can I start doing this right now and eventually reach alignment in the future? So I think the point that I'm at the moment is I'm still trying to craft out the vision, the purpose, and the steps that I want to take to alignment. But I know that I'm at that stage where I feel like I've got some of the blue sky thinking down in order to do that. And
are you prepared to share, roughly speaking, where you're at with that? What is it that Fiyal was born to do?
I think it comes down to service and helping people, essentially. And
in any particular realm?
The thing that I'm really passionate about, and I think we'll get onto it later, is helping other women, essentially. And I think what I'm seeing around me from my peers at the moment is this situation where we're unlike the generation that's come before us, in the sense that a lot of us are like second-gen immigrants, or we're more established than we were in comparison to our mothers or our grandmothers, for example. We have the education, we have the qualifications behind us that allows us to offer more, I guess. I want to be careful with that term, more, because that's subjective to what you think.
Sure, yeah.
But it's...
Let's say contribute in a different way.
Exactly, yeah. Contribute in a different way. And I think the difficulty that a lot of my peers face, my friends face, is that we get to a juncture point where there's a lot of friction when it comes to the stage that you're about to get married, or you're starting to think about children, for example, because we're sort of, I guess the messaging that's around us is more to focus on that a lot more. And there's a juncture point of how do you combine the experience that you've had before, previously, all the tools that you've utilized, but then you're at this point where you're now taking a different path. How do you combine the two? I'm still trying to articulate it well, but...
Like, are you saying that as an issue that you want to contribute to? You want to help people figure this out, essentially?
Yeah, exactly, because I feel like it's definitely something a lot of people are struggling with. And I think it's a different struggle to the struggle that men are facing. I hope it's okay for me to say this, but in the sense that I don't think you necessarily feel that as much.
Yeah, because our mission is more easily aligned with our life stages, or at least it's more compatible with, more obviously compatible with our next stage of life.
Okay.
Or with less disruption. I mean, we'll get into that in the sort of the next section, but I think sort of helping to solve that issue is something that you're quite passionate about. Yeah. And then also like sustainability, which is the field that you're in at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean.
And what about you? How's it evolved?
Well, it's actually been more than 6 years. I was hiding my age there, but I've been in the legal industry for coming up to 8 years now, believe it or not. Of which 5 have been as a qualified lawyer. And at the start, there was an element of Ikigai in it, to be fair to myself, because I always just really enjoyed languages growing up, especially at school and even at university. I studied classics, Latin and ancient Greek.
So you wanted to do legalese? Is that what?
Well, I did identify an overlap between...
What's the overlap between languages and law?
It's in contractual drafting. Because believe it or not, despite the stereotype of T's and C's, they are actually intended to clarify language and not make it more obscure.
It's a work in progress. Yeah.
It's definitely a work in progress. There's a lot more to be done, but there's clearly a need for linguistic input there and clear expression and articulation, which one gleans from having studied languages for several years, and which I continue to do through Arabic because it is a passion. So there was something of an overlap between what I like and what I'm good at. I wouldn't say it was 100% overlap. Clearly, there's more to being a lawyer than just drafting contracts. There's a lot of negotiation, there's research and stuff. But there were certainly elements of it. For liking essay-based subjects kind of lends itself quite a lot to, providing research notes and digging deep into areas of law and stuff like that. So I guess like 2 of the 3 elements of conventional ikigai, I was sort of identifying.
Sure.
The contribution to wider society was less in my mind whilst I was at university and becoming a sort of trainee solicitor. But I, like Fiyal, I knew it was a stable profession that I wanted to do. It was also something that was, I guess, inculcated from an early age from my parents.
Yeah.
My father in particular, identified law as a good stable profession for me specifically, actually. Yeah. And so where I'm at, going through the years now after qualification is that, as those who know me will be well aware, there's this area within law of Islamic finance. I know it's not necessarily a term that you might very much be a fan of, but just financing transactions in a way that is compatible with our values, let's say, as Muslims, uppercase or otherwise. And that's an area that I sort of dedicated a significant amount of time to studying over what ended up being the course of 4 years with Mufti Faraz Adam, concurrently actually with discovering your work in Club Revelation. And so having completed that last year, I do want to sort of not give back, but contribute to that industry. And as of relatively recently, I believe I found something of a pivot that allows me more scope to do that. Okay. I find myself listening to what you say as probably being more on the side of, I'm on the journey, but it's I'm not quite there yet, or so maybe there's more urgency that's needed. But that's sort of where I'm up to currently on that. And obviously a lot of this overlapped with personal life changes as well, as Phil alludes to. So there's a lot of parts of life that string together when it comes to this, and we are people. We're not parts of people at the end of the day. So it's all kind of come together. But that's where I'm at.
Okay. And so your next steps with this would be what?
Well, I think my next steps with it would be to, I think, more clearly identify how to spend a greater proportion of my time contributing to that industry. And also deciding, do I want to apply the knowledge that I learned more directly to teaching? That would obviously require some amount of time and years. And if I only had 3 years to live, then it might not be sufficient to sort of get to the most qualified level at that. But at least there could be some level of contribution there. I know I'm a relatively obscure figure online, unlike many other public-facing Muslims, and maybe I could do more to change that in the interim.
I think the way to think about it is just to how can I be useful, right?
Yeah.
It's not, and then all this other stuff is becomes sort of secondary in terms of or does that involve me being more public? Then the public facing part doesn't become like a mini objective as such. It's just this is just a natural way to become more useful, or that's a natural way to become more useful. Just to start actually solving whatever problems or answering questions or dealing with the issues or contributing to discussion more proactively. And also if you can identify a specific problem, a specific issue, a specific confusion that you're trying to resolve, that would be helpful because because then okay, fine. Now I need to. I'm not figuring out what the issue I'm trying to actually deal with, because it's very vague and broad if you just say, well, I just want to contribute to this industry. If you say there are certain types of people who've got this particular issue, right, or this confusion, either practically or in terms of their understanding, and I want to contribute either to the knowledge or the solution for this particular thing. What pain point am I resolving? And then to start resolving.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I guess the difference with me is that my experience at least is less on the sort of retail side. So a lot of the solution driving in the industry that I'm referring to has been on the retail side for consumers, which is great. Obviously, as a lawyer, the side of it that I'm more involved in is the corporate side.
Yeah, I understand.
And
but in the future, in terms of what you're talking about, is more a retail kind of or like individual consumer type of thing, or
It could be if it's in the education space. I think that would make more sense. In the services space, probably less so. I think that's kind of being done, has been done, or is in the process of being done.
Yeah.
So I do think that I could be quite useful on the corporate side. But as you can tell, I'm still sort of figuring it out.
But that's the important thing. I think for both of you, like, it's like, and for anybody really, it's like, it's identify the pain point that in resolving would give you the biggest buzz. Okay. Now that's really important, because what you want to be able to do is, it's like the kind of effect, because even in your work as it is right now, there'll be aspects of your work that when a certain thing is a certain effect, you have effected a certain thing, let's say in a certain way, that for whatever reason, feels more rewarding or not, right? Now what's really interesting is that, when it comes to this idea of how we connect to the value that we are bringing, right? Sometimes in a workplace, depending on what it is, it's like the value, like a person celebrates a value contribution, not because of they feel some connection to the value contribution, but just because in this almost artificial sort of sense, because others value their contribution. Now I feel valued because how other, right? Regardless of what that contribution is, whether in the grander scheme of things it really matters or doesn't matter. That's kind of one thing. That's not to say that's it's a driver, but it's a slightly more fickle driver, right? But what you want to do, especially as you're going in this direction, is to say, okay, what's the kind of thing that when I achieve that thing, like that brings me a lot of meaning, contentment, fulfillment, and I feel that there's a likelihood of divine approval, at least in principle, to the extent that makes me feel like that's what's going to really sustain it, right? That's where the God-centeredness kind of aspect really then comes in, right? The kind of value I've added, I feel like matters to God, matters to people, matters to me, all three. Okay, now like you can't beat that essentially. So you need to identify that. This like the switch. So for me, for example, I would say it's to do with this, like an aha moment or a realization in someone in relation to a particular issue where they realize, okay, this is a more meaningful, like relatable, or just a deeper way to appreciate or understand a certain thing. So it's a mindset shift, right? So every time I get that, for me, and that helps as part of you to be able to sustain the thing that you want to do, right? Because if I regularly receive like a messages, or sometimes when I'm maybe feeling like despondent or kind of giving up on stuff or whatever, but then you get an email or a message from somebody who says, I mean, in some cases literally like some people like to say, you saved my life. Some of them mean in a literal way, some of them mean in a kind of that broader way, or I like, or I remember all my prayers because of this particular thing you said years ago, or 6 years ago when you came and did a talk in this place, and I can't even have no recollection of the thing even happened. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. So, but for me, the value is like they now saw things. It's a perspective shift. So that's the thing that because for me personally, that's like I've always valued, and so to the extent that you can bring that to somebody else, for me that's what it is, right? So that's why my stuff always tries to go in that sort of direction. But I think that's a really important thing for you to really think carefully about. It's like it's not, and in a way within the parameters that we've discussed, it's almost to be like almost to be selfish about it, right? You have to love it, you have to enjoy it, you have to like it, and be good at it and love doing it. If I didn't need the money, would I still do it? And I would. Why? Because it's just so good, right? It's so valuable. I enjoy it. Why wouldn't I? When you find that, then, because sometimes we kind of pretend, again, part of us, it goes back to going deeper. Am I just saying this about the finance stuff or about this other stuff? I'm not saying it is always the case. That's for you to figure out, right? I'm just saying, is it actually is it just a way of continuing the string? Because I haven't challenged myself to think completely outside of the box, for example, you don't need to respond to that now, but I'm just saying,
no, I know.
Right? I'm just saying as a thing, yeah.
So how did this come about for you, for example, when you were transitioning from NZF? Like what is it that used to give you that aha moment, like you said, to then want to start your own venture?
So I've explained before, like in it, because when I was in National Zakah Foundation and we were setting up this whole thing about local collection and distribution of zakah, there's so many different components, especially as a CEO, then you're involved in like everything to varying degrees. And so for me, it was the educational part of it that I just found myself like enjoying most. But then when I thought about it, I realized that even from a very young age, like I was involved in that kind of thing, like some kind of learning, teaching, or learning, sharing, I should say, right? From a kind of just a young age, even, at home we would host kind of, boys of my age would host in my house, and we would like, and sometimes in the local mosque or whatever, and then we would, and I would kind of facilitate a group where we're just sharing and discussing, so it just, it was always there, and that's often the case, right? It's often somebody realizes like, yeah, that was always there. Sometimes in this kind of stuff, they see, peel back all the layers, and it's like, actually as a child or a teenager or whatever, you saw there's things that are just a lot very intuitive. You just intuitively know about yourself that if it's in broad terms, the kind of effect, the kind of environment, the kind of intelligence also that you apply. We think of intelligence as you well know, right? Like we think of intelligence in very narrow ways sometimes, but there's all these different types of intelligence, and how I can then apply myself in different contexts and perspectives. So yeah, for me it's just that identifying that, and then it's like, again, it's hypothesis, test by doing something. Actually just do something, right? That's the thing. You won't just think I'm thinking about it. No, you will think more by doing. Oh, that didn't work. That did work. That was good. Okay, let me take a bit of this, bit of that, put them together. Let me try this. Just start doing it, basically, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Sure.
Anyway, you were going to, before we deviated, you were going to come on to some other stuff.
Yes. So I alluded to it at the start when we were talking about what it is that we want to get out of the session. And one thing Ali and I have spoken a lot about is how does gender come into play when we're thinking about purpose and mission? And I think specifically when we're talking about women, where the bulk of our responsibilities are within the home, so either nurturing the home or those within it, how do we go beyond that? And do we even need to go beyond that? Like, does Muslim Ikigai apply any differently to us? Do you think?
What do you think?
No.
Okay,
that was a quick no.
Well, elaborate.
I think no, but I think there are different stages to life. And I think with the different stages of life, different priorities take place. And as a result of that, like you were saying, the Muslim Ikigai concept is an iterative process. And you need to continuously question at any one point, is what I'm doing in my day-to-day achieving my true purpose? Am I serving my mission? Am I serving Allah in the best way that I can? And I think for a woman, I feel like that does look very different to a man over the years.
Yeah, that's fine. But the thing is, you see, in a way, like, I actually think it's just helpful to almost take the gender part out of it in a way, right? Because actually, you'll both appreciate, I'm sure, and I'm sure viewers or listeners would agree, that actually, amongst different women, it'll be very different.
Yeah.
And amongst different men, it'll be very different, right? So the reality is that some people, some women will see the domestic part of things, the child rearing part of things, as absolutely central and paramount and what have you, and others will see it as a thing, but not necessarily like the thing. It's like and that might affect, for example, then the timing of when one wants to have children, the number of children one wants to have, all of these different kind of things. The purpose behind it, like it's an interesting one. It's a tough one because in a way, it's just like everything else. Like degree. Job, marriage, kids, like these are all defaults. And in a way, it might sound weird to even question like whether it is a default or needs to be a default or not. But actually, it's at least there is definitely varying degrees of why. Why do I want? Why am I having children here exactly? What is exactly the thing going on here? And I do think that relative to the strength and the clarity of that intention, then again, whether it feels like service, a genuine service, and an aligned thing or not. You see, the worst thing in the world, right, is to just as be doing a job but feel like it's misaligned with your true purpose. But also, like, if you're spending time with your kids or a number of kids, or you're like overwhelmed by all of that, and you also don't, and you feel it's distracting you from the thing that you really want to do. That's a problem. Yeah,
it's got to be aligned.
That's a problem. Yeah, I'm not saying you have to force yourself to be aligned to it. Right. I mean, well, if the situation is the situation, it just you got to deal with it, right? But I'm saying, it's about just thinking about that in advance. Where do I really want this to fit? How does it actually cohere or fit in? Am I really internalizing, conceptualizing it as bringing more faithful, sort of human beings into society, right? Because that's the thinking, certainly Quranically, what we get from the idea of like the point or the highest intention around, say, descendants, is to continue the thread of faith. Right. But like the reality is, most of us, faithful or not, like we don't really. That's not. it's just a standard biological or cultural or social thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not really like I've really thought about it in that way.
Yeah,
You
it's
know?
like the next stage of life. It's
Exactly.
an automatic thing.
Yeah, exactly. Just the next thing to do.
We
So
might be exceptions to that, but only thanks to you.
no, fine, okay, fine. But I'm saying like, fine. But that's just really important. So I'm not necessarily saying that. Obviously, I'm making a broader point. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not doing marriage counselling.
No
not in any position to do that. But I think that So I think that's important because then, and that might be then the framework that you need to use to help others to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay for there to be variety in that, you know,
Yeah, absolutely.
because we see these things sometimes as kind of, because some ladies would rightly or wrongly, but they would very much recoil at your earlier thing around,
Yeah.
well, our responsibilities are more in the home or whatever. Yeah. Now, some people are more that way. Some people are less that way, whatever. Like, to me, I think sometimes some of these things that we put down as like these very specific, like, differences, just by virtue of the fact that there are millions and billions of people, right, within each of these broad, very, very broad camps, by definition is going to imply, right, that there's going to be a lot of diversity within that.
Yeah.
And so what you want to do is help a person give a framework where they feel, again, that my life is service to my Lord. And right now, this is, like you said, right now, this is what it looks like. And I'm good with that, and it feels like it's part and parcel. And look, there are many. A lot of this also comes down to like desire and determination as well, in terms of meaning. If there is an identified cause that has nothing to do with kids and any of that stuff, but that's your life's kind of mission, right? And then within that, you're having children and stuff. There's going to be people who are going to be very effectively able to, right, raise children and still pursue the thing, right, to a degree. Just as many women, again, are able to pursue their various different, careers or what have you, and they're balancing up with this. Now, I'm not saying what the right balance is, right, and I'm not saying that, and I think it's too simplistic to say that, a mother who's fully at home, right, may or may not be successful or effective at how she does what she does. A mother who is, spending a lot of time away from the children, right, they may or may not. There's different outcomes here, right?
Yeah.
It's never going. It's not like a cookie cutter thing where you do this and inputs this and outputs will be that.
Sure.
What's also so it's important not to see it as binary. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like sometimes we just assume, oh yeah, for this period I literally won't be able to do anything, and now I just have to put this other stuff that I was thinking about, my actual dream or whatever, is completely on pause, on hold, can't do anything. No, because now for the next 10 years, it just has to be this, and not necessarily.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays, technologically and otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of that, to be honest, is to do with just expectation. And also, we're living in a very different world to what like our mother's generation lived in, and the possibilities are very different now, like you said, for example, with technology. So I think it's shedding the limitations of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to challenge you slightly on the binary point. I agree it's clearly not binary. It's very contextual to each individual woman and man and couple, etc. But is it not naive to say that there's no difference between the genders when it comes to...
Yeah, but I didn't say that there's no difference. I just said that within the... I'm just talking about this issue to do with, say, domestic responsibility, right?
Right.
A level of responsibility.
Sure, but even there, so you refer to Revelation, and obviously, in chapter 4, sort of in Nisa, the chapter of the women, God says that الرجال قوامون على النساء, that the men are the caretakers of women, and then it goes on to sort of enumerate certain differences between the two.
Sure.
So clearly there is something of a distinction in role, generally speaking, obviously.
I'm not sure that particular verse or that particular statement says anything around... That particular verse doesn't explicitly say anything around...
No, not domestic duties.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. But as a general principle.
Sure.
So does that overarching principle or role influence the purpose that either the man or the woman can have at certain stages of their life? Because if I'm having to be a caretaker, so to speak, of my wife and so on, then I need to obviously factor that into my purpose, whatever it is, and vice versa. If the woman is... You
do, but as I said, there is a diversity in how that's going to play out. What I'm trying to say is that couples' expectation, each spouse's expectation of each other in different marriages can be extremely different and can work, right, is what I'm trying to say, because it depends... A lot of this depends on the mutual expectation of each other, right? So the same... So what is expected of each other? How culturally, I'm just saying there's a range.
There's a spectrum. Yeah.
This particular thing comes down to the issue of, in the end, right? The idea of the sort of a priori or the default kind of responsibility falling upon a man to look after his household, essentially, right? But so in principle, let's say, there's a principle. How that principle plays out, sometimes in some context, like the principle almost doesn't become the reference point almost, just because it doesn't need to be the reference point, because there's just an understanding and it works out the way, whatever the balance of responsibilities, duties, needs, financial situation, whatever, right? So that's it. All it's saying is there's a principle here,
right?
And that's fine. And so in that sense, yes, and clearly, so, I don't think anything I said was to say anything that there are not gender differences.
Sure,
yes, there are.
sure.
But I think with regards to how these things play out in terms of purpose and in terms of like what how I go about my fatherhood, my motherhood, being husband, being wife, which pathways to choose. It's quite. People just need to work it out between themselves. Like one thing amongst a couple sometimes probably that comes up, and I've heard as well, is this. Sometimes couples in their discussion and debating and with each other, sometimes they might reference what's normal. What's normal out there. But this isn't normal. That's not normal, or whatever. But to me, I would say that's really not relevant. Because there is no normal. There's no standard which you objectively know is the objectively correct balance for these kind of quite subtle and subjective kind of matters. What matters is that you reach a mutual kind of understanding of the balance of the things, the way in which you cooperate and function together, etc. Now, whether that is or isn't aligned with some sort of social average, who cares?
The norm is going to change from era to era and place to place
right.
anyway.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's more about it all aligning with the overarching principle. And then within that, that can manifest itself in several different ways.
There is a leadership function, like as we said. There's a you have a leadership function, but it's like, how do you go about being a leader, right? In terms of consulting, in terms of thinking about the future, painting a picture of the future. How do you want things, facilitating that? So, like, it's your job to kind of see to getting things done, essentially, right? And there's probably, I would say, like. Most of us as men underestimate probably the level of responsibility that actually sits there in principle, right? Partly because maybe our spouses or wives, like might overcompensate for our deficiencies oftentimes. So it's like, but I'm just saying, like that's often the case, So that thing comes with that particular thing you quoted is a responsibility point, and it's a sort of a duty point, And like many have said, it's men don't have it easy.
We're all shepherds to our individual flocks, but I think it is a big responsibility on both sides as to what those flocks are. There was sort of one final point here. We might have sort of already covered it. It is. I know you said you don't want to find the balance, or like you're not here to say what the balance is. But do you want to maybe just touch on the sort of the polarization that we might sometimes find here?
Yeah, I think when it comes to this discussion in particular, I feel like there are two polarizing extremes. And I think, obviously, you've touched on it now in terms of the balance being something that you figure out yourself within a couple. But I think the two polarizing views I see, like over-investment in career, and I know you're not talking about career, you're talking about purpose and vision and mission, or just entirely just staying at home, essentially. And I think there is like sort of a jarring transition when you're trying to decide between the two. Is there an in between this, essentially?
Well, this is the thing. So that's again, I would say, you see, the decision about whether to be in this place or that place, right, and how much just time to spend in different spaces and places and what to pursue, again, is to do with, like, it does come back to that kind of vision purpose thing and that alignment. And as much as one knows that for oneself prior to, getting into a relationship, and as much as you're able to discuss that too, so people understand what you're about, and you understand if they're, in terms of your overarching, like the overarching driver for your overarching drivers, are they at least broadly aligned? If that's not there, it becomes really hard, because then so one person's trying to figure out for themselves, but for the other person it's like, well, we're not even sharing the same starting point here, right? Now, there's no right or wrong answer to should I be more in here or more out there. I don't think, right? I think that the justification for whatever is decided needs to come from, again, and this might be a nice way to close this off, right, in terms of it comes back to that point of intention. If what I believe God wants from me is X, and then what's required for me to effectively fulfill X is to be in A space versus B space, or this proportional balance. Because now it's all to do with effectiveness. Everything should just be judged by, here's the objective, right? Here's the best way for me to achieve the objective. But the problem most people have is that there's no objective in the context of which they're even thinking about the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's just some social issue, or like, this is the way it is, or this is what I heard, or this is what I observed when I grew up, or whatever, which are all fine, but they're actually not they're not the reason. Yeah. So if God is the reason, or God should be the reason, then it's all, I'm here right now and I feel comfortable being more at home at a particular point in time because I feel that's where I'm best placed to achieve the thing that I think God wants me to achieve, versus out there, versus like, oh, how can you be out there when your kids are at home, yada, yada, whatever, right? Oh, because actually, no, I've thought through it, I framed it. And I don't care about what he or she thinks, right? Because I framed that for myself and I feel comfortable with that. I'm humble about it. I would listen and to see what the effect is or whatever, but that feels justified, right? Just like a person needs to decide, okay, am I going to spend time away from my family for a period of time? Why? For how long? What's the point of that? That's why none of this stuff, and it goes back to that illusory nature of the world, nothing can be judged from the outward. Nothing. Literally nothing at all. It can be judged from the outward. So I always say, and I always make a point of saying, because of my own story as well, just because I left investment banking to do whatever, I don't judge someone who's in it.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know why they're in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could probably hazard a guess, but it's not my job to hazard a guess.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
My job is to hazard a guess of what the heck I'm doing out
what
here.
am I
right?
doing in this
yeah.
world? Yeah. Exactly,
So this lady has X number of children and she's doing such and such, and this one has less or more children and she's doing such and such. Like, it's all. Are you at peace within yourself, having put yourself in, like having cleared everybody and everyone else out, and just thought, is like, does this feel good with you, kind of thing? And if it does, then you're good.
Excellent. Well, I want to close off very quickly. I know we're short on time. Just quick fire questions.
Okay,
There's
go for
only
it.
5.
Okay,
and
go.
I'm going to say just 1 minute. Okay, so favorite English translation of the Quran?
Ooh, yeah, I go with Abdul Halim.
Okay. Favorite Tom Cruise film?
Ooh, either Jack Reacher or Top Gun Maverick.
Okay, interesting.
Favorite language?
Italian.
Okay.
I did GCSE, yeah.
Did you? Okay, yes, you did. Yeah. Batman or Superman?
Oh, Batman, 100%.
Okay. I knew you were going to say that.
And final one. In one line, what is the main message from you want people to hear?
Figure out what God wants from you and do that, and don't let anything get in the way.
Nice. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you, Fiyal. Thank you, Ali. And hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah?
Yes.
All right.
Good.
Take care. Until then.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Peace be upon you.